It is my absolute delight to have Paul Thornley, PT Ed, Paul Thornley Education, with me today. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Joanne. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for coming. I love it. Paul, I wanted to ask you today about so many things. It's ridiculous. We could talk for a week, right?
We indeed could. And often do.
And often do. But particularly, I wanted to talk to you, Paul, because you and I have had some really important conversations, I think, about removing pain and improving performance with all kinds of people in all different walks of life.
Yep.
But one of the themes that I think we share, although our approaches are quite different, is the idea of a more non-aggressive approach, I think is a kind way of saying it, and a less, shall we say, less traditional biomechanic approach. Can I say that?
You can say what you like. Words are free. What is our intention? To rattle some cages or to expose another concept? Let's expose new ideas, new options.
Exactly. Let's just start with, we know that traditionally, classically, we have a map, if you like, of the human body. We talk about it as if we were talking about the kind of architecture of hard matter.
Yep.
And we are now establishing the foundation that we're talking about the kind of body architecture, what I like to call the new science of body architecture, that is based on soft matter. That lovely word architecture from Jaap van der Waal. And you're a neuromuscular therapist, and you're a very brilliant Pilates teacher, master teacher. And you also were in the army, and you also did a lot, besides that kind of army PT, you've done a lot of martial arts. So I always consider you to be somebody with a fabulous range of movement and manual therapy that can be integrated. So how do you find teaching is different from the soft matter point of view to the hard matter point of view? And here's the key to the question. Is it a hard attitude or a soft attitude that works best? So over to you.
Well, that's a great question. So my background, since I'm 50 this year, I know I look very handsomely young, but since I was 7, my dad decided it would be a good idea, because I was little, to get into some martial arts, because he historically had been bullied as a child himself and thought he didn't want his 2 children, his 2 boys, to be bullied. So he got his little boys into karate, and we were blessed. I mean, when I say blessed, in hindsight, of course, hindsight's a great thing. It's often something we underestimate. But I was with a fantastic brother combo of instructors, the Alec and Peter Laurie are their names, from Liverpool. And they taught karate to us as kids. And I was with them for nearly 2 decades. And what I found was they just embraced teaching movement. And they weren't movement specialists themselves. They were excellent martial artists, but they were builders and joiners. And they came from that building environment. One was a carpenter, one was a builder. And that's what they did together. They worked together to create structures. But when they brought that strength and passion of creating things, but to create movement, they literally were on totally different paths. One did not mimic the other. And as a child, we were absorbed. We were like sponges. And the senior instructor, Alec, he was the eldest brother. He was an amazing, amazing educator and teacher. And he's like my second dad, if you like. I known him since I was such a small boy. And when I'd learned something as a white belt, and then as I went through the grades, he would insist that to make sure it was embedded in you, you understood it, you then go up the senior ranks, the black belts, and teach it. So that you understood the information and you're able to share it. If you could share it, then you understood it well to retain it. But what I noticed over the time, nothing was in straight lines. Everything had flow and motion. And it was a very powerful style. It wasn't one of these gentle arts. It was very aggressively taught. It was very much a case of make it strong, you will be strong. But it had grace to it. And it was a graceful power of a style called Shotokan, which is known for being very hard and rigid. But he had a slightly different approach, and he encompasses as many martial arts as he'd come across, and he infused them, if you like, into our overall foundation. So as I did that over the years, my movement is, I have this brilliant knack of transitioning effortlessly. Now, I'm not as good as graceful as an ice skater, but I can move quite freely. I can change direction efficiently. And it really served me well as a small guy as I transitioned into much more higher intensity exercises when I was joining the forces to run and carry packs. But I just had a better energy system. I was able to absorb stresses more efficiently.
Right.
And I just took that through my life until I eventually ended up having a career change and getting into the injury world when I started when I was 30, treating neuromuscular therapy. And I didn't know about anatomy so much, but when I first went to do my training, I'd just previously done a personal training course, which was all classically taught. And it made no sense to me, the way the instructor was teaching the anatomy, because of this literally reinforced understanding of human movement was not reflected in this anatomy I was expected to memorize and understand and then share in a gymnasium environment. And it clashed. And thankfully, we had a really, really good tutor. He says, this two-dimensional thing doesn't make sense, does it? I says, no, because I don't understand straight lines. Everything must weave. And how you weave it, you create efficiency. And then if out of efficiency becomes natural power, that is effortless. And that's the whole nature of movement, right? It should be effortless power, not stressful, fatiguing. So he said, one second. In the next week, he brought in a leg of lamb. He said, let's do anatomy on this. And I was like, wow, look at this. And we were all aghast. He says, but now let's find origin insertions. Let's look at where things are. And it was impossible to relate what you saw on the table now in this three-dimensional structure and a book. And it was my first experience of a teacher who actually knew how to explain text and academic learning into reality. And it really helped me because I'm not an academic. I need visual things. I need to see things. I don't think I've read a full book in my life. I've read abstracts of it to get ideas and understanding. So from there, it gave me a really good foundation. And then I appreciate why I needed to know my anatomy. So I had the language. And it was contextualized properly. He said, you need to know it for the language of the mapping, like you were explaining. We must understand the maps, but it doesn't represent the territory or the terrain you're going to be working in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just like now in the 21st century, we call that GPS, right? When you get in your car, there isn't a blue line in front of you. There's tarmac. Makes sense? So, but knowing the map helped me orientate myself. And then when I was exposed to neuromuscular therapy, not long after that particular course, it was just a revelation. From day one, this is John Sharkey's educational college in Dublin. And I started doing the neuromuscular therapy training. And I did the whole cert and then the high diploma just consecutively because of timing. And it was always X never marks the spot. That the body is one, and where people are experiencing discomfort is often just a result of an outcome because the environment has changed in such a way that those forces or dysfunctional patterning has been exposed, if you like, in this particular area. But why is it there? Why is it going through this sequence of events that's led to this outcome? And then over time, you learn strategies of helping people not only recognize their own movement pattern that led them to this outcome, but nice strategies, very subtle strategies of helping them navigate out of this scenario into a much better lifestyle of movement choices, which were aided by our ability to use our hands to influence the tissue. But it was always super subtle. It was never dictated. And the word like deep tissue never came into anything. It was always be light, be gentle, be courteous to the tissue and encourage it to where it wants to go based on your understanding of where the restriction or the barriers happen to be. And over time, it just starts to make more sense. But it is a learning experience. And you learn through experience of making many mistakes. And we were encouraged to make those mistakes because there is no, like when John wrote his book, Trigger Point Therapy, he changed all the traditional crosses of trigger point recognition and location to more of a blob, if you like, more of a blur. It will be in this region somewhere. And then to find out the region, you have to really heighten your skills of palpation so you could locate it appropriately and then decide what to do with what you were feeling. And then that takes time.
That was quite daring of John. I mean, I have a different experience. of when I first encountered myofascial trigger points. And funnily enough, it was an expert in Germany who's an orthopedic surgeon who put his knife down 25 years ago and refused to cut anybody and said there's ways of doing this without cutting, which a man called Norbert Becker, who's a friend of Robert Schleip's, and fabulous man. And I was actually teaching yoga to his wife at the time, and she had a shoulder issue, and I hadn't been taught myofascial trigger points at that time. And he said, would you look at my wife? Because we all know we're not great at our own kin because we care so much that we resolve it for them.
Yes.
And I just did what I knew, which is structural integration, and found that all this stuff in the mass around the shoulder and the trapezius and blah, 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 and worked on her and made such a difference. And he said, but you worked in places that aren't trigger points. And I said, well, I couldn't do much else. I don't know where the trigger points are. And it wasn't until several years later I met John Sharkey, who said, X does not mark the spot. And I thought, oh my God, this is music to my ears. So I wasn't doing it right. I wasn't doing it by design. I was doing it because I'm taught to feel all the tissue through. Structural integration is notorious for going everywhere.
Yes.
But my point to you is, this is what I'm so fascinated by, that John dared to say X doesn't mark the spot. It's around there somewhere.
Correct.
But how do you greet it? How do you integrate it? And this is the key that I wanted to ask you. Did you find, compared to your army days, for example, that softer approach, A, made a difference with your manual work, and B, did it make a difference with movement work? Because I know you went on to teach Pilates.
Well, exactly. Like how the two worlds collided in my mind. When I was martial arting and learning to strike or defend, and defending is basically striking before you've been hit. But where you release the power through your hand or your arm or your leg, that's not where the source comes from. That's just the end. It's like the whip of a towel. The power is not the whip at the end. It's the way you maneuver that particular limb or structure and integrate it to create that efficiency at the end. Well, the same in the body. When you get that intertwining intellectual awareness, you go, oh my God, this is how the body moves. This is why this sovereignty of touch is having such an effect on a much more global area.
Right.
And then, because if you go hard, again, if you apply the same process to movement and hard impact in movement, without having the ability to transition and move away from it, then there's an end to it. It just stops. And the same if you apply touch in the same way. When you apply touch and you do hard and you go depth, you miss like a myriad of information or feedback from the tissue that is going to direct you to where to go or where to go and investigate. But it just take a long time to get that touch sensation so you can understand the feedback you're getting, to know where to travel or to where to go and explore. And you need to have that integrated way of listening to the client's feedback. I think too often when I was listening to other people on the course and mixing my knowledge with the surrounding therapists that were also trying to explain to me why mine was wrong when theirs was better, it was very much a dictatorial approach. I have this technique, I'm going to do this technique and it will make this tissue do this. But in our way of approaching soft tissue interaction, more like, and try to re-educate the tissue again, to remind it what it can do, what it perhaps should be doing rather than what it's currently doing now, is to encourage it and ask it to do it and see if it responds that way. And by that way, you have to go light. You have to be subtle to feel the change that's occurring over time, because it's not instantaneous. What you find is clients all of a sudden, they think you're a magician, like you did something magic. And all you did was have patience. And they don't teach you patience. You have to experience it, because we're all so keen to succeed or keen to do something and to achieve something and make somebody smile or hit a certain landmark or a milestone.
Get rid of their pain quickly.
Yes, they want to get rid of it. They want to get rid of pain quickly. And the fact of the matter is you can get rid of pain like that, but it will come back twice as fast and often twice as severe if you rush it, because you don't get the longevity. You get that quick fix. You get that quick release, that pseudo release, if you like, of pleasure. But of course, you haven't changed the environment. You haven't changed why they were experiencing that in the first place, or why they've got to that tipping point where the body's gone, I cannot adapt anymore for you. Here's the pain. Now you've got to live with this because I did all the adaptation I could do because you ignored me and you ignored the many, many myriad of signals the body and the neural system gave you to say that you're not doing things quite right. And now they hit that tipping point where that boundary is breached and the body responds in its own way and defends itself and says, I'm done. And then they want me to turn back the clock of 10 years and say, what can you do today? Because I've only got this much money. I go, my God, you're expensive, Paul. And I go, well, you need time because knowing where to hit the nail and which bit of the wood, I have experience and I know where to put it and I'll get as quick as I can. But I need time to investigate how you created this scenario so that I know what circumstances to try to influence to get you out of this pain. And that's where then understanding therapeutic approaches rather than traditional classic approaches has transformed the perception of actual rehabilitation. I think therapeutic approaches are amazing, very subtle. They have a much more effective and a much more influential impact on dysfunction. And they're easier to maintain and they're easier to replicate by your clientele. They don't need to have this piece of paper they follow. They don't, because that's not a sensory feedback. They're just reading and trying to copy rather than recognize how to create contact or create position or create a certain level of intensity through movement that they can recognize and they can own and restore much better function way, way more effectively.
So what you're basically saying is, if I've got this correctly, is that you're giving your client their own self-regulatory repertoire.
Yep.
So they can actually sense their own sensing, if you will,
Yep.
and
Yes.
find it. I mean, I was originally trained in structural integration, which is deep soft tissue work, and it's known as deep tissue work. And we're taught how to use our elbows and our
Yes.
forearms and all this deep stuff, which can be super valuable. And I'm really glad I've got that knowledge.
Yes.
For myself, the first thing I did after completing that training was go and do craniosacral therapy because I wanted to understand the volume control. I call it the volume control. I wanted to find out, is it the same dial?
Yes.
And I found out that actually it is, but if the client holds the remote, if the client has the up and the dial, the client can dial up and dial down. And what I wanted to ask you about was, do you think it's helped you having both movement and manual therapy to manage that self-regulation? Or do you favor one over the other? What's your experience of assisting people from movement if we were to separate them, movement and manual therapy? I know they're not entirely separable.
Well, no, they're totally intertwined, aren't they? And one complements the other. And if you have access to learning both from reputable systems that do dovetail together nicely, then you should be encouraged to do so and have as many modalities as you can, as much in the toolbox as possible. But personally, my personal favorite is teaching people how to move. So where I really excel in my own practice, what I really enjoy doing is watching how they move when they're not aware of it. So I like to look at my clients when they arrive or when they're moving around in my environment and how do they naturally move and I'm pretty good now at being able to observe their pattern and their habits. And then by that measure, then it's really easy to explain my observations and cue them appropriately so that they feel that they automatically take control of their posture and movement instantly because they've automatically been given control back. My experience of people in pain is they feel they've lost control and they're searching for help. But if you can give them that remote control back and say, you can choose your own resonance, your own volume, you're in charge of the outcome of this. And they just need guidance. And too often they've been given blind guidance. The people have come to me, so they've been given a sense of, okay, come to me and I will help you. And they may have had success on the table or in a studio, whatever that modality of studio is, the yoga, Pilates, gym, whatever it happens to be, by that rehabilitation specialist. And then they left. So they've won in the room, but they weren't able to take the skills with them. It was delivered by the therapist, and the therapist knows what happened, but too often the client has no idea what happened. They just experience, wow, that was me, I'll come back. And it's like a conveyor belt. And I find my greatest success and when I'm the most happiest is when my clients don't need me. They come back because they want to remind themselves why they were in pain. Because they forget why they were in pain once you've done a really good job. and that they're really moving better. They're feeling a much different sensation or level of discomfort. It's completely changed. I normally aim for about 50% better in the first session if I can. That's how I hold my own barometer. Did I halve it in any way, in any meaningful way? And so then that way I know I can hold myself accountable and do my own audit on whether I continue in the same direction or I alter my approach. But often they forget that they were in pain and then they stop coming. And then they find out the pain, and then they remember the pain comes back. Or they hear somebody else in pain, so, you must go and see Paul. But when they get blind treated, it's because they're not given the information. Often they're given a pamphlet to say, copy this. And this has no reflection of what they did themselves. It wasn't specific to their characteristics or to their requirements. It's just a generic form. And you're just told to copy these movement patterns and you'll be fine. And invariably that creates other issues because now they're copying movement choices that are really not, they don't know how to apply them to themselves. So for me, movement is the key, teaching people how to move and to take that movement to their environment. And I had this conversation recently at a convention. I was chatting to a room of personal trainers. And they were all on about squatting and everything being linear and everything being in these certain planes of movement. And I then went on to explain that I don't think it's appropriate because life physiology and exercise physiology are very, very different things.
Yeah.
People don't sit down in a chair the way you squat with a bar on your neck.
Absolutely.
But I think one thing translates into doing the other thing more effectively.
Well,
and quite the contrary, you've trained your body to move totally differently in two different environments for two very different reasons.
In fact, I was just going to say this. I'm slightly baffled by that example because why would you sit down in a chair the way you would carry a barbell? Try that again. Why would you sit down in a chair the same way that you would carry a weights across your shoulders? That makes no sense at all.
But this is the information people are getting, and they're getting told if you do these exercises, it will strengthen you. If you do these exercises, it will give you more endurance and longevity. If you do these exercises, you'll be able to endure more pain. Why should you ever have to endure pain? I've come from many environments where pain was part of the process. Karate is hard. There's painful environments, but you have to have restorative training. And within that whole art, not everything is done at a high intensity. There's many occasions throughout the different sessions you take part in where you're doing much, much calmer, more restorative movements or learning patterns of movement that you transfer into live action and sparring. Same in the military. You can't arrive at the battlefield fatigued. You're no good. And you must all arrive at the same time. So they teach you how to do it efficiently so that no matter what size of person, you all arrive together. And you all work in unison together. It's very clever how they do it. And it's clever because they've spent time going, how do we make a body of people arrive at the same area at the same time with the same capacity to function? But they're not robots. So how do we do it? And it's really clever how they position you. And they put the little guys at the front and the big guys at the back. So the little guys at the front, they set the pace. Because if the big guys at the front, the little guys are running. They can't keep up.
I know there's an awful lot of work done in military organization. And I'm always fascinated by, particularly in England, our very beautiful pageantry, for example, and the military precision with which everything is conducted.
Yes.
It's a fascination to me because I know a couple of people that are involved in that, and it really does bring home this sense that if movement is well thought out and well organized,
yes,
then it gives rise to what I call elastic energy.
Yes.
It's not the only person calling it that, but I just call it elastic recoil energy. And of course, the fascial matrix is so designed to promote that. If only we know
exactly
what we're doing with it. But
exactly.
I think so many people get stuck in this idea that we're a stacked system of bones, one on top of the other, the spinal column, which we know is impossible.
Columns don't move, do they? Columns of men move. From the military term, column of men will turn right. A column of men will march forward. But that's just a term of phrase for that environment, for that particular group of body. And that's where our language...
It's like columns that don't go parallel to the ground.
No, exactly.
By definition of it is at right angles. That wrecks my head.
But again, that comes down to how we choose our vocabulary, right? Because our vocabulary depending on the conversation, will either make sense or it will contradict what you're actually talking about. And when we're talking about human physiology, again, this is where we go back to where we're educating people, or we call it educating, where you're trying to make sure that people understand what they're made of and how what they're made of survives and lives and prospers. And again, we now know, and we know conclusively, that we're a non-compressive structure. We are not compressed and held together by compression. We're held together by tension bias structures and forces. That, of course, needs compression.
We can't have one without the other.
No, we absolutely need both, but we are tension biased, because if you aren't tension biased, when you move, you've got no tension to bring you back. You'll fall over like a tower. And it's making sure that people understand that they have not only those two forces, but then they have the mythical force that nobody can own or photograph, and it's life. The fact that we're a living entity, and we shouldn't have to explain that, but because you can't fit that in a mathematical formula, it was discarded many, many centuries ago, and we were just turned to two main particles of the body, bones and muscles. But when we have a much clearer set of lenses, and we have a much clearer, it's our curiosity is what's allowed us to break down the barriers of these academic lectures. I said, no, you must do it this way. And you go, why? Why do I have to do it that way? When we go on dissection courses, I can't see any muscle. I can only see skin. And when I cut the skin, I see fat. And when I see fat, I go down to this umbrella-like tissue that's just covering everything. And I've got to go, how do I get, and it's not packing. People say it's like a packing agent. When I explain what fascia is, they go, oh yeah, but fascia, you're bringing things down to reductionism. I says, no. You must understand we've just missed this particular material out of our bodies and out of our lecturing and education for so long. We're just spending a good portion of our time now reintegrating it to what we should know, rather than saying it's a separate tissue that we all focus on, fascia, because fascia in itself doesn't do anything either. Fascia is really important to know, but it's not the only thing we know. We must know how it unifies everything. And how it comes from our embryologic beginnings, and how it helps us grow and creates our shape, and how it evolves over our lifetime. But knowing what it's made of and how to influence it is going to take us decades to get right. But we have a good idea now. We have a really good idea, and we can influence, and people like me can influence it. And I'm not a professor, I'm just Paul. And if I can teach people to do it, and I can teach my clients to do it themselves, because they own their own fascia. And once you explain how it unifies and allows and facilitates movement and growth, and it first identifies or helps them identify those dysfunctions and those painful experiences they're in. But also, if you understand it well, it's a quick access to releasing that pain they're having to tolerate and endure, and that they can have a much brighter and more pain-free movement pattern. But again, that depends how we explain that to them, right? I'm just going to put the light on this. It's gone dark. 1 second.
So with all that you've said about how we march and some of the things you learned in the army, that there's a particular way of working with the human differences, differentiating the tall from the short to understand the function of getting a whole army of men from one place to another, differentiating where the pain comes from versus where the pain is expressing itself in the body when it's moving. These differentiations. There's talk in the world of fascia. I remember when Robert Schleich very first presented the International Fascia Research Congress, and he said there was a lot of response back then from the martial arts saying, this is what we've been talking about all the time. And in fact, I had a friend who was very well known in Aikido, and he was saying that another document had been found, like the missing piece, which was really sounded like the fascia, but they didn't have the language to translate it. So it had been untranslated. I don't know what that's all about. But going back full circle, do you think for you personally, Paul, now, I know everything you do personally feeds into your practice, but when you were 7, but one of the things you loved was the very real, living, animated way you were being trained to move, and that without knowing it, do you think now what you understand about fascia, do you think that now they feed together, that they've kind of come full circle? Not 50 years, 43 years later, but...
Exactly. When you're 7, you know nothing. You're just guided, right? And you'll do exactly as you're told, and you're influenced by your peers and the people you aspire to be like. And I can only say I was very lucky the people I was surrounded by who were exceptional at what they did and shared it with me and allowed me to become quite competent at what I like doing. And as I transitioned into my adult life and then into my various job careers as they went along until I ended up in the neuromuscular therapy and Pilates world, they just naturally dominoed into each other. And if I'd not had that training earlier on, I don't know that I would have recognized it so quickly, because I often ponder, why do people find who learn about this information at a similar time as me, why are they struggling to explain it or apply it so well? And I find that puzzling, because I'm like, well, we were in the same course. We heard the same information and we're doing a similar role, but why are you struggling to apply or adapt it in that way? And I think I was very lucky, because I've always felt like I was omnidirectional. I've never, ever felt that I had to stand still. Standing still, I got hit. I always learned to move fluidly because I had to move. Otherwise, I was going to get caught because I was little. And when I recognized that my legs, I was never meant to do the splits because I've got these tiny little legs and a really long body. God wasn't kind to me in that regard. He made me really weird. So I wasn't able to kick somebody in the head because my legs wouldn't reach that high. So I learned to sweep. I learned to adapt my technique to help me compete in an environment of other people who had their own specialties. And as I go through my life, I've always had to adapt. And what I've found full circle is that we're the most incredible structure and it can adapt to almost anything. But all of the sports I've done and the activities I've done, I've never been injured in martial arts. Well, how is that possible? If I'm treating day on day people who are getting injured doing many, many sports and activities, how come in martial arts, and I've been in many competitions, and I'm now currently for the last 2 years doing jujitsu, where the main point of that is to make somebody go to sleep or put their joints in a certain position where you can break them or immobilize them. But I've not been injured. And yet we're going full throttle. And I think it's because martial arts and dance is exactly how the body is designed to move in this effortless, efficient way of transporting and moving and transforming from your blueprint and being able to return and knowing how to go forward and backwards just as well. That you have to have the ability to change direction, heights, and speeds so that you don't find yourself caught out, that you have the ability to adapt and in any given moment. And that's what that sort of training gives you. It gives you the ability to anticipate without recognizing you are doing. You're just naturally doing it if you started early on. And it's ingrained into you to look for movement options, to recognize obstacles. Whereas in the majority of sporting modalities now, any of them, they're all one directional. Or they train in one directional and then do an unpredictable sport like football or rugby. So they're training for that, which in action, it's all unpredictable movements and completely unpredictable. They don't know where they're going to be turning or when they're going to be doing it, but it's going to be at high speed and it's going to have to have an immediate reaction. But how they train for it traditionally is in a room where the machines are pushing them in straight lines.
Don't get me on straight lines. So,
I know. But so full circle, it's important how it transitions to then taking my approach to my own experiences through my life and understanding how our tissue is 100% omnidirectional. And we should be able to move as easily backwards as we do forward and in every direction. When I go to treat clients who are in pain, this is the type of information I'm trying to share with them and let them make sure that they experience, because once they experience it, then their pain management is in their own hands. Because pain removed is easy, but to keep pain at bay is very difficult if you don't change.
And improving performance is another whole thing, because this is where pain removed, performance improved came from. Originally from working with structural work, where you're working with chronic pain rather than acute. So I don't work with injuries that have just happened. It's classical, bedded down, embedded patterns. But also that once they're removed, that's sustainably gone because the client has some kind of inner awareness. And that's where I think the challenge is in yoga, for example. You just made me think this. In yoga, one of the beautiful things about the yoga poses is that they are omnidirectional. We work upside down, we work different balances, so we're working with balance and integration and movement and so on. However, there's this massive emphasis on stretching in yoga.
Yes.
So I wanted to take you to that. Even if we're on omnidirectional, that's very much in its favor and adaptability. But I
Yes.
find myself, as I, like you, travel the world, work around the world, people think of yoga as synonymous with, this is
They
the
do.
phrase we always get, I'm too stiff to touch my toes. I can't do yoga. I can't even tell you, if I could have a pound for every time I've heard that phrase. So what do you say to that? Because I know Pilates is your key
Yes.
movement modality, notwithstanding your expertise in martial arts, but you don't teach martial arts, do you?
Not as a martial arts practice. I teach martial arts movement in my therapeutic teaching because it's like a gift. And people don't realize they're doing martial arts until all of a sudden they're doing it. They go, oh wow. So you got to sneak it in, right? Because people's interpretation of martial arts that is aggressive. It's Bruce Lee. They're going, oh, and make all these really weird noises. And yet when you actually introduce the movement options, they go, where did this come from? And I go, just something I picked up. And I don't tell it. I don't say what it is. I just tell them to do it. But you're absolutely right. There is that perception that Pilates is for the ground and yoga is for stretching. And I just think that's just a misconception of the whole notion of quality movement. So, of course, I'm biased to Pilates, and I do love it because it helps you take away unnecessary movement and give people a foundation to move from, but give them the safety net of a blueprint that they're on. I've evolved to really not like the mat. I find the mat is such a constraining prop. They must stay in the confines of a mat when I don't want them to. I want them to have the freedom of the floor. So I've started to remove the mat now. I know that's annoyed a few people, but I just feel that it's one of those props that has become embedded in all classes. There must be a mat underneath you. Why? It gets in the way. It restricts movement sometimes. Sometimes it's a useful prop for proprioception and give them nice feedback or make them feel comfortable. But invariably, it's a pain in the ass and it gets right in the way. And it prevents quality transitions. It prevents and inhibits the ability to move freely, in my experience. But when we talk about stretching in all of the modalities, and remember, my background is an environment where stretching was really massively taught. And I was never, ever be able to, I could not do the splits if you paid me £1 million. And I've been in every ratchet machine known to man. But thank God I didn't sustain any significant injury due to it. Especially now I understand the physiology more. And I say this all the time to my clients. And my experience now of treating chronic pain for 20 years is an awful lot of pain scenarios that are now experienced by people. I've come from people where when you ask them and you get into understanding what they've been doing for the large majority of their exercise is stretching. And stretching beyond their natural barriers. And you ask them, well, what do they consider to be stretching? When are they happy when they're stretching? And it's when they express and they explain to you in detail how they go about doing it. Then it's just as obvious as the nose on my face that action is what created the environment that the body's defending itself against. And when I explain to them, because I understand the physiology of stretching and how you cannot stretch living tissue, because without damaging it, because people are not aware that that's what they're doing. So once you explain to them and you show them, you demonstrate that you cannot do passive stretching in any positive way, because it will just result in the body defending itself. And they go, well, can I dynamic the stretch? And I go, well, if it's dynamic, it's not stretching then. That's just a series of coordinated contractions. And then they go, what? And I go, well, you can't stretch something that's pulling back, no. It's contracting. There's a chemical and electrical response making it work. So by definition, it's not stretching. And they go, oh, and I say, let's do it. And then you get them to experience it and they go, oh yeah, it's not moving. I go, because you can't. You put it in a position where it's active. It's actively controlling where you are. So by definition, you cannot lengthen. So let's go back to the passive stretching that you're doing. That's actually creating the problem. And because they just don't understand boundary, they don't understand where their limitations are. They don't understand how the physiology of the tissue is giving them feedback to recognize that they should perhaps investigate certain angles, but listen to when they've got to the boundary of that angle and go, okay, I'm going to come back from there now. And that's where you then go back to that elastic energy that we utilize in the movement to create and restore elastic energy, rather than abuse it. And like your analogy earlier, we talked about a bow and arrow. You don't want the bow to snap. You don't want it to fray. You don't want it to fray like the bow of a violin when the hairs fray because they've been overworked. You want it to maintain that deliciousness, that integrated. It shouldn't
glide.
fray.
Yeah.
There must be that glide, because if it runs out of the ability to glide, it can only adhere. It can only tack. Once it tacks, you can only then drag. And by dragging, you create friction, and friction creates inflammation. And then you buy a physio a new gym.
And I love talking with somebody that knows that we have to change the language. And I think this is another one of the difficulties, let's be honest. I mean, you've just beautifully explained why the body resists deformation beyond its appropriate physiological range. That's what you've just explained. But
because it would fall over, otherwise, wouldn't it? It would fall.
But we've got these words. We've got the word stiffness. We've got the word stretch, and we look for releasing. We use words like myofascial release. Drives me nuts.
Yes,
because you don't. If something releases, that's like taking off a neoprene wetsuit. You release it, you unzip it, and you take it off. That's great. You don't want your body to do that. You want your body to stay whole.
Yes.
And so I think we're part of the crowd. Let's say there's so many protagonists in this conversation, but you're one of them, who are changing the way we language so that it actually makes sense of what I call body sense.
Yes.
So that body sense is given credit for its innate intelligence, because now that we know fascia is the largest sensory organ of the body,
exactly,
we actually know that tissue knows where it is. We don't know where we are. We might think we're doing exercises off a sheet of paper. Movement is not an intellectual process, as well that's driven me for years. And where we're left with is, okay, well, how do we describe this instinctive thing, which means we haven't got language for it because we're doing it anyway. How do we describe that in language? And I think one of the things that we're gradually moving towards is changing the vocabulary, because, for example, if we haven't got sufficient stiffness, we're too soggy.
Correct.
Or lax. We don't want that. But we don't want stiffness when we use the term pathologically. We want to change how we use the word stretching. What we actually mean is what? Lengthening or reaching or
changing shape, exploring boundaries. But the thing, if you to get in our industry, it's all about having validation and credibility. And what I've experienced over the last 2 decades, and the people I've associated myself with through my learning experience, is they hold themselves accountable for the language they choose to use to explain things. And then it then often gets translated, varies from person to person. And then that language starts to get diluted, or then starts to get ignored or interpreted differently. And I think what we're trying to establish now, I think we're much better at it now. I think we've had enough time to establish a much better choice of words and vocabulary that is becoming more established. I think people are hearing the fact that we cannot stretch living tissue way more often by way more people. And they're being given other vocabulary to utilize to explain the sensations and the feedback that they are experiencing. Because there's been enough time to research it now. We've got enough really awesome protagonists doing brilliant work that we're able to bridge and share with the audiences that we have. Whereas before we didn't have that words and it wasn't being shared consistently. And I think we just have to be very mindful that what we do say, we own, and that we have authenticity in the words we're choosing. Because I think often language is used ad lib. And if words have no meaning, then it is a free for all. And then that's when it gets lost in the communication. It gets lost in the conversation. And then that's when you get debates over a word that really didn't describe what we're really talking about, because it's just because of habit that they use that word.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think holding people and ourselves accountable first and foremost, because once we have consistency amongst the educators, then you get consistency in what's heard in the audience.
Yeah.
And now the audience then start to spread it better for us, because it's through the audience that we spread our information, right? Because we can talk to a blue in the face, but if we don't share it consistently with our audiences, who then integrate and migrate around the globe, then the language, it just gets translated into many different interpretations and it gets lost. And then, of course, they can only then go back to what they do know, which is classical learnings and that traditional language that we've all had to learn, and it's comfortable and it's safe and convenient. So it is challenging. But I think it's such a worthwhile trend. That's why we're evolving, right? Because we're open to challenge. And I think that's why we've got where we are now. We've evolved to where we are because we've been brave and we've stood out from the crowd and we've not stayed with the herd and we've felt stupid and made mistakes. But as a collective, we're so much stronger and we're getting our message out there way better. And our clients and audiences are benefiting from that bravery from many people, particularly the likes of you, who are bothering to write down this information, create books out of it. Because without that, we don't have our Bibles, we don't have our literature to fall upon. And we need that to reinforce how that this is a better concept of helping people get out of pain and have a brilliant life where they can enjoy their bodies appropriately. And recognize if they choose to go and abuse it, that's okay. If they choose to go and do some crazy activity, that's absolutely fine, because we'll help them have that restorative effect where they have the ability to restore the tissue's health. So it allows them to enjoy their life without having to endure unnecessary bouts of pain that they're just trying to tolerate rather than approach and own.
Well, I think people also, Paul, have forgotten how to, or don't even think we've got the right to think that we can just live our lives in comfort and ease. We've kind of lost touch with that. You know, my colleague and friend Shane McDermott talks about those basic wisdom drives, and movement is an essential wisdom drive. Nature is another one. Water and drinking thirst is another. Hunger is another. And doing this all in a way that's appropriate to soft tissue as opposed to hard tissue.
Yes.
I mean, I remember the shoe research when
Yes.
it was discovered that the Tarahumara Indians, Chris McDougall's work, were basically running on plimsolls, for want of a better word, to stop the soles of their feet getting actually hurt by a bit of sharp rock or a bit of something. And their running gait was fantastic. And the shoes that were being developed with computers inside them and all stuff were basically giving the feet the sensory message that they were on a picnic.
Yeah.
When in actual fact, they needed to be alive and well and awake and as near to the ground as possible without being exposed to being cut.
Yeah.
And that they were the feedback mechanism that told the rest of the body the changes in terrain, and their sensitivity was essential.
Yeah.
So all those, literally, they found the soft tissue injury in elite athletes was literally could follow the curve of the increased research into shoe development, protecting the feet. Because basically it was over protecting the feet out of their job.
It took the foot out of the parameters. It took the foot out of the equation and went, the shoe now is your foot.
But
and the sole of that shoe is, and it can't be. Exactly. And what they found, if I remember this right, is if you're on a hard surface, this is why cross-country and track and road runners run very differently. They have different styles and they don't transition to those crossover effects well sometimes, not all of them, because if you run on a hard surface, just for adaptation, your tissue above it must be softer. It must have yield in it. Because you can't have two hard subjects just dragging it. There has to be a give to it. But likewise, if you make the shoe softer, then the tissue above it has to stiffen excessively so to match that surface and that sensory feedback. And of course, when you change terrain, you change surface, and maybe there's not enough time for adaptation to take place where the tissue is able to conform to the surface you're now running on. And again, when I was in the forces, going back to that, this is 1988. I joined the forces and we were to run in trainers for the first time ever with high load. They took the boots off you and you're only allowed to put the boots on, the high impact boots, once you were in the field. Because they found young guys like me who had come from soft backgrounds of wearing trainers at school, we hadn't got the density and firmness in our tissues to take load effectively. So they needed time for our tissue to adapt because they were losing too many recruits too early on with stress fractures and breaks and muscular sprains and such like. So they allowed your tissue to adapt in training. It was brilliant. I think it was light years ahead of where the research is now. And we're only hearing of it now. But back in 1988, it had already been established that young guys, I was not even 17, you were a trainer when you were on a hard surface. And when you go into the field, you put your boots on. And then over the training regime, you then start to transition into running in more solid footwear so that your bodies have the opportunity to adapt to to that change. But again, like you say, I don't think people are mindful enough of the choices they're making because they don't know the consequences. And consequences should be owned first. You should recognize that your choices of movement, because movement should be awesome, right? It should be delicious and explorative and brilliant and invigorating. And often it's debilitating. It's a flipping nightmare to go exercising sometimes. And then the consequences of that are like, can't be bothered. And then you lose the flow of just moving and it becomes a drudge. And then this constant battle of fighting injuries that you created in an environment you didn't want to be in.
Paul, on that note, yes, in capital letters with about 20 S's after it. And thank you for the most gorgeous, delicious contribution. And I hope everyone listening out there is inspired. And just thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for chatting to me. Thanks for letting me talk.
Big love. Can't hear enough of it.
Thank you.